And for the early Christians, who were Jewish converts to Christianity, and many of the other Christians who were Gentiles had converted through Judaism, and then the ones who were just Gentiles who didn't become Jewish, they of course learned about the Old Testament, so they were familiar with it too. They had a very special regard and love for the temple in Jerusalem, but it wasn't there anymore. And so the church began this process of thinking, well, okay, we can't focus on that as being the place of the encounter between humanity and divinity. And that's when they looked to Mary. Because they said, wait. There is a place where this happened. If the temple that was chosen by God, the place was chosen by God, prepared by God, the people were prepared by God, everything was built according to His plan, and yet that temple was only a footstool, then Mary, who was chosen by God, prepared by God, from the people of Israel, all of the circumstances of her story were also prepared by His hand and will. She actually had Jesus in her womb, and He was contained. God was contained in Jesus in the womb of Mary. That which could not happen in the temple happened in Mary's body. And so Mary became from that point on, she began to be called Platitera Tomoranon, which means wider than the heavens. The Mother of God, more spacious than the heavens. And because this image, this is a theological reality, this is not something that we as humans can really grasp. This became, in churches, it became a very important focal point. Because the earliest Christian churches, at one point, up until about the 6th century, they were all focused on Jerusalem. Because Jerusalem still was that special, unique place. But from about the mid-5th century, the church began to depict on the back wall of the church, not the back wall, I would say the front wall of the church, where the priest is facing, the congregation is facing, they depicted an image of Mary praying. The same way that everyone in church prays, hands outstretched. And she has in front of her a mandorla, which is a halo, usually roundish or almond-shaped. And within it is the child Christ. And that is the image of the Mother of God, more spacious than the heavens, the new temple, the temple of the new covenant. And so that's why, going back to this, that's why this feast came about. Because they were trying to show a direct correlation between the person of Mary as a Jewish woman going to the temple and the role of her as the new temple in the old temple. So that's why I think this is how the story got kind of spun. It's a pun on words, by the way, spun. The spinning of the veil. So, delayed reaction. But there are many titles that, you see, this is the experience of the early church. And the focus, although it was on the person of Mary in one way, because as I said, Mary for us as human beings, as a woman, a mother, has that nurturing, that kindness, that loving persona that is so easy to relate to. That's not where we can stop. We really need to look at her in relationship to Christ. And when we look at images of Christ, for example, one of the oldest traditions of the church was that in icons, Mary would not be depicted standing alone. And, and throughout history, there have been different images of Mary depicted alone. And probably one of the images, like even when you have Mary standing with her arms outstretched, she is usually right behind the altar where the tabernacle is, and so it's in relationship to the Eucharist. So even though Jesus isn't part of that icon, it's just her depicted like with her arms outstretched praying. There you have to look beyond that and see where the connections are. But in the oldest icons that we see of Mary, Mary is depicted in two ways. There are basically all icons can be boiled down to three types of images. The first one is that that I spoke about, the one behind the altar with the Jesus and the mandorla. That is a theological icon. It is an icon that is not to be taken as some sort of a photograph, but rather it's something to be read as a theological treatise. It's got a lot of meaning in the way that it's set up. The other two icons are, we say, well, they're icons of Mary with Jesus, but they're basically icons that focus either on Jesus' humanity or on Jesus' divinity. This icon right here focuses on Jesus' divinity because he is sitting on her arm. They could take her out of the icon and put a throne under him and he'd be just fine. He's literally not seated as a child on his mother's arm, but rather he's seated on her as on a throne. And she is pointing to him with her hand, and she is bowing to him as her God. So and that is pointing everything, Jesus' divinity. Now there's a very famous icon that I'm sure most of you are familiar with that points to Jesus' humanity. And that is the icon of Our Lady of Perpetual Help. Okay? That icon, of course, the story that is behind that icon is that it's based on an apocryphal gospel that is called the infancy narrative. And that tells us about Jesus' childhood. And again, these are stories not meant to deceive. They're ancient Christian texts that were written within the context of the church to teach the faith. And it tells stories about like Jesus going around as a little child raising dead birds, practicing, I guess, for what was going to happen later. It was nice. But it shows also, again, it's showing that even as a child, there was already an awareness that he was not just a child. Because of course that's how you express that, that you have a child who is human and God at the same time. And it's like, if you really get into it, it could sound like a multiple personality disorder. But that wasn't the case. It was, within him was this awareness. And how it was expressed, we don't know, but those stories illustrate that. And so also with this icon, the Our Lady of Perpetual Help story is that two angels, and I guess on the icon they're Michael and Gabriel, they came to Jesus when he was a small child and appeared to him as he was playing, and they showed him the instruments of his passion. Talk about cruel angels playing some practical joke. Let's go mess around with God's Son. So they take the cross and the nails and the crown of thorns, and he becomes scared. He runs to his mother, jumps into her arms, and in his haste in running, one of his sandals gets untied, which is a part of that icon. And he holds on to her. So that is an icon that shows his humanity. And then, so all icons basically, they fit into one or the other. if you're familiar with the very famous icon of the Virgin of Vladimir, the patroness of Russia and Ukraine. And that is an icon that is called the Virgin of Compassion. And again, the faces are close together. It's an emotional icon. So when you see the icons, it's pretty much, you can tell by how attached he is to Mary. If he's holding on to her, it's usually focused on humanity. If he's kind of aloof and seated in a different enthroned position, or he's not really interacting with Mary, then that's an icon that points to the awareness of his divinity.